Oh, I do love the music that we're rocking into and out of breaks at the moment. Thank you, Stu. This is Jonny Gould right here on Talk Radio. In just a moment, we're going to look back at the films of the decade, and there's some very interesting ones down here as we count down on the charts. But what I'm going to ask expert film critic Van Connor is, how much of the cinema experience has been taken away by the box set? I mean, this has been the decade of the box set. Netflix and Sky and Amazon, all those things really have changed the dynamic of cinema going, haven't they? Do you remember the age of the video in the 1980s? That really threatened cinemas as well, and they changed things. Piracy became an issue which they stood on, and there was a second golden age of cinema. But I'm just wondering, before we count down the charts of the best films of the decade, whether the box set is the final death knell for the movies, your night out at the cinema. Let's ask Van Connor, our film critic. Welcome along to the show here. My name's Jonny Gould. What's yours, Van?
How's it going, Johnny? Happy to be here. And I don't think the box set will be the end. I think the playlist will be the end of the old-fashioned cinema.
Oh, tell me about the playlist. What's the distinction?
Well, we're 5 minutes away from somewhere like Netflix actually having a dedicated, for instance, Marvel playlist where you play the first one and watch all 20-something films through, or something like that.
Because all these major film stars are now taking on these beautifully presented, because of course we're now all watching HD and Super HD and marvelous slow-mo, all the kind of big movie stars are moving into television now. Do you think the cinema has been affected? I think in terms of content, me as a casual viewer of the cinema, I can see that actually the kind of dynamic of what is a movie at the cinema has been affected by the box set.
Well, I mean, it's a definite shift in the way that television has been viewed, and that came along sort of at the end of the 20th century, just after the millennium, what we call the peak TV period, the golden age of television, when the cable drama started rising to prominence. We had things like The Sopranos and Sex and the City, and then 24 came on. 24 was a very big example where Kiefer Sutherland had very famously been something of a holdout. He didn't think that it was much of an evolution in one's career to go from film to television, but he made the justification. When you've got Sean Penn turning up on Friends, maybe the game has changed. That was his exact quote.
Indeed, it seems to be that now. So, Van, let's go straight to those charts. And you've put number 10 of the films of the decade, Guardians of the Galaxy.
I did. I want to stress, I don't think these are the best films of the decade. I think these are my favourite films of the decade.
These are your own personal choices.
These are my picks. These are what I think define the past 10
Okay,
years.
very interesting.
Guardians of the Galaxy was a real game changer for what now is the biggest brand in the world. Back in 2014, July 31st, this came out, and it was Marvel finally proving that it wasn't just enough for them to take an established character that you'd heard of. They couldn't just take a Hulk or a Captain America. They could literally take a set of characters you had never heard of and turn it into their own personal Star Wars with all of the thrills, spills, adventures, and explosions to match. It was a hell of a time.
So the action movie is firmly still with us, and I presume the technology, the Moore's law, the idea that processing becomes faster and faster means that sort of the explosions and the virtual reality make car chases and explosions and buildings falling over all the more remarkable in the 21st century.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we've seen a resurgence in the last few years of proper old-school action films, something that I would say is a staple of the 1980s. And you look at something like, for instance, John Wick, which didn't make my chart, but very easily could have, and how applying 21st century sensibilities to something like that absolutely can work with modern production techniques, modern editing, modern choreography, exactly how just outright insane that can really get.
Right. Well, at number 9, you've picked The Duff.
Yeah, this is one I don't think is going to get mentioned in a lot of top 10 lists.
I'd never heard of it, frankly.
This is Ari Sandel's teen comedy from back in 2015. Duff stands for Designated Ugly Fat Friend. It's a comedy starring Mae Whitman, who is basically the quirky one of a group of female friends, who discovers that she is the Duff. She's the designated ugly fat friend, as they call it in high school, who boys approach to get to the other friends. And it is this really great social media savvy, which even then was still relatively new, very clever, very witty look at the dynamics of personality in the age of social media and modern clicks. I thought it was a genuinely great time. I think it's a star-making performance from Mae Whitman. She's got a real sparkle in this. And also, I quite like seeing Robbie Amell in there. He's a sort of love interest / platonic friend. Great performance from him as well. A lot of cheek, a lot of charm. I was a very big fan of this.
Right. Now, at number 8 is a film, a co-production of the USA and the UK, a science fiction film directed by Ridley Scott. Of course, I'm talking of The Martian.
Yeah, The Martian. Again, I knew the book was popular. I went along to see the film. Wasn't expecting a whole heap. I think I'd heard mixed buzz about it. Walked in, had my mind blown. It was one of my favourite films it was my favourite film of that year. It was between that and Mad Max Fury Road. And it was, for me, cementing the idea of Matt Damon as the modern movie star. He is, of course, the astronaut who gets Mark Watney, who gets left behind on Mars by accident when his fellow astronauts are forced to evacuate due to a storm. They assume he's dead, and he is stuck there for years while NASA tries to make its way back to him. It is a genuinely brilliant movie, full of really great gags, full of really insightful character writing. I think it's the best thing Ridley Scott has directed this century, hands down. Oh, easily. But
so will there be a Martian 2? It sounds like at the beginning of a franchise.
Oh, well, no, I think the story is relatively self-contained. It gets a very closed ending. The story is told. And for me, though, the brilliance of The Martian is it's a kind of story that we don't see told very often. It is a film about the therapeutic healing powers of methodical problem solving.
Right.
The idea that being the most ruthless and logical person can just help you keep your sanity. And I think the way that Matt Damon plays that, absolutely top notch.
The first example since Spock, way back in 1960 something or other. Now, at number 7, your personal choice of the decade, Van, you've gone for Gone Girl, a 2014 American psychological thriller directed by David Fincher.
So this was, of course, this was an adaptation of the then very popular Gillian Flynn novel. You couldn't move for copies of this novel back in 2013 and 2014. The movie came out, and it was the last hurrah before Ben Affleck became Batman. And it was Ben Affleck was the husband whose wife had gone missing under mysterious circumstances. He is blamed for her disappearance in the press. He basically gets tried in the media, but she's not quite everything she's depicted to be, and therein lies the mystery. A great directorial turn from David Fincher, who, Fincher is one of the greats of our time directorially. The story, I haven't read the novel, but I found the story incredibly compelling. For me, this played as a sort of equivalent for this generation to something like Fatal Attraction or something like Jagged Edge. It just had that raw, for the adults, R-rated erotic thriller kind of a quality to it, and I thought it was just phenomenal.
Right. Okay, well, we've got a very famous movie with arguably the most beautiful publicity poster of the decade as well now, The Shape of Water. At number 6, it's got a couple in a moment of clinch with a shoe coming off in deep water, lit from the top very beautifully by sunlight in sort of turquoise, different kinds of turquoise. Only a couple of years ago, the American romantic dark fantasy film directed by Guillermo del Toro and written by del Toro and Vanessa Taylor. Tell us about The Shape of Water, a really, really famous movie of this time.
It was an absolutely glorious film. Now, Del Toro obviously won the Best Picture for this. He has credited its conception to basically being his own opinion of watching The Creature from the Black Lagoon when he was a child and basically seeing the romanticism of the monster in there. And you see this movie which basically takes that idea of what would happen if, a Cold War era US government captured something like The Creature from the Black Lagoon and, a mute woman entered into a romance with it. And it is just a beautiful, haunting film. Terrific, almost wordless performance from Doug Jones as the creature. Sally Hawkins, a literally wordless performance. I think she gets one line of dialogue. And the whole musical number is it's ballet through the prism of 1950s creature features.
Right.
Very much the kind of thing that only Guillermo del Toro could have produced. And for me, absolutely one of the standouts of the decade, naturally, absolutely deserving of every award nomination it got, and just a film that can have you weeping, angry and horrified in equal measure.
Van, it seems to me you need a university degree to understand the plots these days. What on earth was that? The idea of it, I'm glad they get invested in for all I can see. Absolutely brilliant. Right, okay, we're going to take a short break here on Talk Radio, and now we're into the top 5 of Van Conner's films of the decade. Remember, these aren't about grossing amounts, the greatest movies of the time. These are a film critic, and a very good one at that, Van's personal choice of the best movies of the decade. Next, we're going to look at Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, only from last year, right here on Talk Radio. Well, I don't think Inspector Clouseau is involved in this particular movie decade, but we're counting down the top 10 films of the decade, the personal choice of our film critic Van Connor, and we've reached number 5, Van. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, a 2018 American computer-animated superhero film featuring all the Marvel Comics characters that you'd love and respect, eh?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, when this was announced that they were going to do an animated Spider-Man movie, that it wouldn't be connected to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, everyone, myself included, took a look at that information and thought, well, that's going to be a waste of time. And then it turned out to just be one of the best things they could absolutely ever have done with this character. It is an absolutely glorious animated romp.
And so, of course, it's completely animated, which is an unusual one. And let me just stress here, it's for adults. It's not for kids, is it?
Well, it works for kids, but it also works for adults. So the idea here is we've got an alternative reality with a different Spider-Man, Miles Morales, instead of Peter Parker for a change. And due to reality-bending circumstances, different Spider-Men from different alternate realities, which include a sort of frazzled, jaded, middle-aged, cynical version of Peter Parker, Spider-Gwen, Spider-Man Noir, voiced brilliantly by Nicolas Cage, for instance, all start to filter over, and all the various Spider-Men have to team up together in order to take down the Kingpin and thwart his scheme to basically suck the power out of the universe in order to resurrect his dead family. It is animated, it is a little quirky to look at, but there is a lot of nuance and a lot of depth to even the choices of the different styles of animation they use. Right,
very interesting. Well, producer David loves it, so maybe I'll get it out on Netflix because it's probably available there now. Popstar is your number 4 choice. Never Stop, Never Stopping, a 2016 American mockumentary. Is this a sort of Ricky Gervais kind of idea, or have I got the wrong end of the stick here?
Almost. The idea, so it is a mockumentary in the style that The Office is, but this owes more of the depth to something like This Is Spinal Tap. Now, I actually have gone out and called this generation Spinal Tap, because rather than an 80s hair metal band, what you have here is a mockumentary lampooning a sort of a hybridized character who's a mixture of Justin Timberlake and Justin Bieber, but brought to life by Andy Samberg from The Lonely Island and Brooklyn Nine-Nine. The other members of the Lonely Island band do appear within the film, but of course the key is all of the jabs it takes at the music industry, all of the fun it has lampooning the mechanisms of social media, the idea of the various things that celebrities will do to try and stay relevant. And it's a film that will date very quickly in decades to come, but as an encapsulation of this decade, of this moment, of what celebrity meant, these last few years, I think this is very, very hard to beat, and I think Andy Samberg is terrific in it.
Do you know what? I do love snapshots of eras because, as you say, agendas move on so fast. What, as a society, we think is important moves on so fast, and actually these little snapshots are fascinating moments about what was going on in society at the time. Number 3 is a movie which I saw at the cinema, and at the beginning of it, Sandra Bullock and the other space cadet are spinning out of control in black darkness, and I gotta tell you, it made me dizzy on the big screen. I could not cope with it. Genuinely, I didn't like it. It sent me into a sort of panic. I didn't like it at all. We're talking Gravity here, a 2013 sci-fi thriller directed by Alfonso Cuarón with Sandra Bullock and George Clooney as American astronauts stranded in space after the destruction of their space shuttle. It sounds a little bit like The Martian.
A little bit. Obviously, there's a little bit of overlap in that area, but this came up actually a lot this year with the release of Ad Astra, because the opening of that movie owes a significant debt to Gravity. But Gravity, like you say, you sat there in the cinema and you felt nauseous and dizzy.
No, I did.
I had the exact same experience. I went and saw this twice in IMAX. I went the first time to review it, saw it in IMAX, had what I can only describe as an experience that Alton Towers could never dream.
Honestly, I did too. I actually didn't like it.
For me, it
was brilliantly done.
This is as close as I'm ever getting to being in space. And as a simulation, it's hard to top. But also, wonderful performance of Sandra Bullock. The character was originally written as male, apparently, and she decided to, take on the role. They then just didn't change anything. They made her a woman instead. Clooney just going for the full maximum Clooney charm that he does, and of course, just terrific visuals, but from right here in the UK, and just amazing direction, just an incredible vision from Alfonso Cuarón, who previous to this had brought us the best of the Harry Potter movies, Prisoner of Azkaban, and of course, Children of Men. The guy is a real visionary, and I think followed this up with The Revenant years later, and he is a genuine tour de force in the film business.
Oh, I was hoping The Revenant might be in your charts, because that was a weird one where he was hiding in the carcass of a bear, wasn't he, because it was so cold.
I think between the two, I cannot possibly top Gravity for just what an experience that is. I personally think Gravity should be brought back once a year, shown exclusively in IMAX for a week, and that people should just go and pay homage to it.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, if it's on IMAX, I might give it a wide berth, because you might not see me again. Tell me, how bankable is George Clooney at the end of this decade? I mean, he was the undeniable number one, wasn't he, at the start of it, with Tom Hanks as the male lead. But, he's got married to Amal Clooney, he's in the papers a lot more, he's making little cups of coffee all the time in little capsules. He's directing. He's had grey hair from an early age, and I'm just wondering, is he still the sort of same movie star, or Van, do you think he's sort of moving on to a different stage of his life?
I think George Clooney has moved on to a stage now where we will only see him on screen when he wants to be on screen.
Right.
It's not a need for him anymore. It's the same thing as Brad Pitt, really, where they are now at a stage where their names are so ubiquitous, they're involved in so many causes, they're in the press for a lot of things that aren't specifically film related, that when we do see them on a cinema screen, odds are that is purely because they want to be there. It's something they believe in. And to be fair to Clooney, he had a hard road getting there. The guy had a number of flops on his way up. I mean, we all remember the missteps of things like From Dusk Till Dawn, which is an amazing movie, but was never going to be a blockbuster champion. Batman and Robin is a dumpster fire in cinematic history. The Peacemaker wasn't exactly what you'd call a crowd pleaser. But you know what? He got there in the end, and he became the megastar, and he's absolutely earned the status he has.
I was very interested to see that actually a lot of the major film stars worked so hard and were actually involved in more than one production at the same time. Some of them were terrible flops. I watched a sort of homage to Hugh Grant, and it's been decided in the last few weeks that he's a national institution by our colluding media, whatever. Not very good at politics, but perhaps better at movies. But he, during Four Weddings and a Funeral, was involved in a flop at the same time, but the Four Weddings thing kind of made him the superstar that he is today. The journey began there for him.
I remember, for instance, Hugh Grant's intended American breakthrough project was a 1996 medical thriller with Gene Hackman called Extreme Measures. That thing bombed. The film actually wasn't bad, but it absolutely bombed. I think he had 9 months out around the same time, and it was around the time he was caught with Divine Brown, and there was that whole scandal.
Oh, yeah.
These things don't always work out, but you know what? Paddington 2 made him the national treasure, and Love Actually had cemented him as a bit of an icon before that. So again, at least he got there in the end.
He got there in the end. And talking about nearly getting there in the end, we're at number 2, because your number 2 film of the decade, your personal choice, Van, is Her, a 2013 American sci-fi romantic drama written, directed and produced by Spike Jonze.
Yeah, starring Joaquin Phoenix, who I think is going to appear on a lot of best of decade lists performance-wise for his turn in things like Joker and You Were Never Really Here. But for me, this is the best film Joaquin Phoenix was involved in this decade. This is one of the most ridiculous concepts for a movie, but done completely seriously and played with absolute investable romanticism. For me, it is one of the most hauntingly beautiful films of this century. Really? And the basic remit is Joaquin Phoenix falls in love with Siri, for lack of a better term. Voiced here by Scarlett Johansson. It was originally Samantha Morton when they were making the film. Later on, she's recast as Scarlett Johansson. And it is literally a film of a man named Theodore Twomley who writes greeting cards. That's literally, he writes letters and greetings cards. And he falls in love with his artificial intelligence operating system and runs his life, manages his schedule, replies to his phone calls and text messages. And it's just the way that the relationship is played, the way it's drawn out, the way the human condition is explored, especially when one of them isn't even human, is just unfathomably brilliant.
Hey Siri, what's Van Connor talking about?
Quite.
Okay, I found this on the web for what is Van Connor talking about.
There you go. I think I'm falling in love, Van. Right, excellent. Now, drum roll please, because we're up to number 1. This is Van Connor's number 1 choice of movies between 2010 and 2019. Are you going to introduce it for us, Van?
I'm quite happy to, because there's a good chance a lot of people won't have heard of this. Even though it is sat on Netflix waiting for them when they get the drive.
A real treat tonight, then, eh?
Yeah, this is 2013's Snowpiercer by Bong Joon-ho. It is effectively George Orwell on a train with an all-star cast. It is an absolute belter of a film. It's a film that absolutely blew my mind when I saw it. And the idea is, after the climate apocalypse has frozen the Earth, the only survivors of humanity are those on board a train powered by a perpetual motion engine, which means it will never stop, and forced to rely on the delicate ecosystem that's been built within it. However, at the front of the train are the rich people, at the back of the train are the poor people. And there is a very strict hierarchy and a caste system in play that then gets usurped by an emerging rebellion led by the likes of John Hurt, Chris Evans and Jamie Bell, who seek to rise up and effectively fight their way to the front of the train, to stop living off the scraps and go for the gold themselves.
Wow, that is amazing. And also, I note in this introduction that it's a South Korean Czech production, proving that money truly is international.
Well, it really is. Most of the cast are British as well.
Is that right?
So you wind up with, like, say, John Hurt's in there. You wind up with Jamie Bell. You wind up with Ewan Brandner. But there's also the likes, for instance, of Octavia Spencer, of Chris Evans, of Tilda Swinton, of Ed Harris, of Alison Pill. It has got a truly amazing cast. But this is a film that you watch now and you think, the obvious influence on this, because it is adapted from a French graphic novel series called Las Biergens, I think, and it does owe a very significant debt to Orwellian lore, like 1984 and things like that. And for me, the idea of doing this kind of a basic, let's do Orwell but with sci-fi, is literally what the entire concept of science fiction is founded on for me.
Wow. And in the minute we've got left, Van, can I ask you, you obviously agonized over this and watched hours and hours and hours of movies. What were the sort of near misses? What was a film just outside the top 10 that you'd like to have added?
John Wick was definitely one that I wanted to put in there. I was a big fan of Inception. I thought Inception was a great movie as well. Stoker, Whiplash. To be honest, there's 2 Mission Impossible sequels I can put in there. The Big Short, The Revenant, as you pointed out,
yeah,
in there as well. Deadpool, Green Room, Hail Caesar, The Big Sick, Get Out, I thought was an amazing movie as well. And of course, Armando Iannucci's The Death of Stalin, which for me, one of the comedies of the decade, hands down as well.
Absolutely. Well, it's an industry which appears to be in rude health. Van Connor, thank you so much for joining us here on Talk Radio, running through the top 10. And make a note of these, ladies and gentlemen: The Guardians of the Galaxy, The Duff, The Martian, Gone Girl, The Shape of Water, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Popstar, Never Stop, Never Stopping, Gravity, Her, and Snowpiercer, which Van reliably informs us, if you've never heard of it, it's waiting for you on Netflix tonight. This is Jonny Gould here on Talk Radio. I hope you're enjoying the show, and we've got an exciting final hour coming up as we go stateside in the USA with John Le Batoulier.